Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome along to those in the hall here at Dhammaloka tonight, and a big welcome too to everybody looking in on the internet. So, unfortunately tonight, I usually start off with a little ad for our care group, for our listening line at the house, but unfortunately it's not manned tonight, so we haven't got the numbers up on the screen. It's an unfortunate situation that's happened, but we can't provide that service tonight. So, but it will be back each Wednesday night. We'll be doing that. It's just one of those things, I trust, for this week. So the care group line isn't there tonight. So tonight I thought that I would give you a little talk, first of all, just on making meaning from life. Making meaning from life. And then we'll do that for about a half an hour, and then as I usually try to do is I'll try to pick what we talk about up during the talk, pick that up into the meditation as we follow through into the meditation for the second half of tonight. So just this idea of making meaning in our life, it's really one of those things it's interesting to note, isn't it? Just what it is that life is about. I quite often sort of talk about the idea of, of me for myself. I find life in a way quite a bizarre thing. It's an interesting thing to be part of. I find it quite interesting that we are here on this planet. I know that I've sort of given this analogy before in talks that I make, but it genuinely puzzles me really when I think about this. I just think if there was any screenwriter or a writer of a story that wanted to make something up about how to make a movie about something, you couldn't. The idea of the way that this earth and the way that we live on this earth, just making a meaning of that would be probably one of the most interesting films of the lot, because when you consider just the way that we kind of get lost in our lives, the way that we get conditioned and then we kind of just follow along with our lives without really thinking too much about just what it is that we're doing, really, although that's not necessarily always true, because we certainly put a lot of effort, I think, into as I'm going to probably try and demonstrate tonight, a lot of effort into becoming qualified and able to sort of exist and live and making our lives good. We try very hard to do that, but we do get lost in just exactly what it is that we're involved in here. And that's what I'm meaning when we kind of look down on ourselves, or look from above. If we look down on this planet and we see that we are on a planet, and there's a moon that runs around the planet, and that we're in a solar system with a sun, and the sun's a star. I mean, even that's bizarre enough anyway, when you look up there and you see all these stars, countless stars up in the sky, up in space. And then the way that physicists describe the way that we're living on this planet, on this sort of round globe that's spinning and sort of moving through seasons. And, it's quite obvious, every year I kind of watch these seasons so compellingly, really, just to see the way that it's so clockwork, really, in the way the universe works. But then when you look out further into the depths of the space and things like this, it just becomes so interesting and bizarre, really, the whole of what we're involved in. Because, you end up, for myself anyway, I see that it's really difficult to try and make any meaning of just what that all is. I've got no idea why all of these solar systems and things are out there in this apparent external world that we're sort of all involved in. So making meaning from your life, at one level it might just seem fairly simple if we just sort of stay here, keep our ideas and what we're doing just in the confines of living day-to-day life here without sort of thinking too much further about that. But if you do want to look a little further, and I think that the Buddha was probably a person that did want to look a little bit further. He went outside of the palace, after he lived a good few years and even became married and had a son. So, and all of that mainly confined around his palace. They're living quite well and opulently, I imagine, in terms of certainly in comparison to the people that live outside. It would have been quite outside of the palace. That is, it would be quite a comparison to see. But even with his ability to live well in the palace, he still kind of had this questioning, didn't he? And I think that's the same thing as what I have when I look, and possibly for you too. If you sort of think about these things, you'll probably have the same puzzle going on in your mind, just about what it is. How do we make meaning of all of this? And probably what we do is, I just was listening to somebody talk on the radio the other day, and they were just talking about the way that we kind of turn achievements into addictions, which is really just interesting to think about that too, because we do that, don't we? We're all sort of on this idea of achieving things, making the meaning from our life to come from the way we achieve, the way that we kind of work and see the way that we get status and so on in the way that we work. Achieving things is apparently one thing that we're really good at. But then what if you're an underachiever? What if you don't achieve very much? Because people that achieve are usually they're seen as fairly deserving, I would imagine, And just the other note that I had here, that they're usually praised as deserving people, but yet the people who underachieve or are not so good at doing those sorts of things are seen as more undeserving, or even looked down upon. You might even say sometimes. So, is that the right way to live life? Too, like that? Is that the right way to make meaning from the world when we're looking at that way? I mean, apparently in the Bible of all places, as this person was mentioning in the radio broadcast that I was listening to, there's apparently a parable of the worker in the Bible. I don't really remember. So I have read the Bible through, but I don't remember this parable much. But apparently the parable of the worker goes such that this employer was hiring someone at 6 o'clock in the morning to work, and they worked all day. But right through the day, the employer kept on employing people. So through the day, he was employing more people, and they would just work for the day. And then even right late into the evening, he was still employing people. And at the end of the day, he paid them all the same wage. And you can imagine that would be a bit of a problem, really, for most of us. Certainly, if we had practiced to do this work in an achieving way, we wouldn't like that too much. But apparently, the parable is meant to show that in God's kingdom, that there really is no real place for striving for worldly thoughts and possessions, I guess, would be the way to see it. And that sort of just living in a way that was more generous, living in a way that was maybe more understanding and working with others might be a more wholesome and better way to go in that way of seeing things. The way that just trying to understand just what that parable means, the parable of the worker. And I think that's kind of how it is really at the moment in the way that we sort of see the way that we should make meaning of our lives in this world, really. But on the other hand, certainly we do in a way look after the world and I think in Australia and probably some of the Western countries too, we have some very fine governmental things now too, where we kind of look after people that are disabled or less fortunate or unable to work. And I think in ways too, you can actually see that when you look at things in that way, you apply your life in service to somebody else, you're really, doing something wonderful. Actually, I think it is. Even though probably in our world today, the people that do that kind of work are not as highly valued as the maybe people that have the more high achieving status in the world. And I know that all this generalising that I'm doing here is, there'll be sort of holes you can pick in it everywhere. But just as a general rule, when we're looking at this world and looking at the way that we should try to make meaning out of it, or the way that we can make meaning out of what this life is, it always becomes problematic, doesn't it? And it becomes problematic too, really, because of the first noble truth that the Buddha set forward. Because when we know that we're working with dukkha, and we know that all the conditioning that comes about in the world is all shot through with dukkha, but whenever you're working with conditioning that really can't be, in a way, brought together and unified, it is a very difficult job to do. It's a very difficult job to try and make things balance out, so that it's balanced out into a nice, even, wholesome way. So the dukkha part does certainly cause us a bit of an issue in terms of making meaning from a Buddhist perspective. And then when you look at the way that the Buddha kind of came out of his palace, actually, and then when he went on to be a monk and to try and learn what this life was all about, he learnt first of all the meditations that most of the people around could sort of show him, but then he realised that wasn't quite enough either, and then he kind of moved on to thinking about going in the opposite directions rather than kind of seeing life as something that should be comfortable or trying to make your mind peaceful through a comfortable way of kind of doing things. He kind of looked at that opposite way of doing that into making himself into a person who would kind of give the body curry all of the time, always thrashing himself, sort of trying to force the idea out. So it was like as if the body needed to be beaten all of the time. And you see that happening quite a lot in the world too, just people that sort of thrash themselves to try and find spiritual enlightenment or wearing hair shirts and things like that. Well, the Buddha did that too. He kind of ended up really in quite a sad state, really, in the end. He realised that he couldn't keep doing that because he was close to death at that one point when he was working through his asceticism. So it was that point in time where he realised that perhaps I need to go for the middle way between extremes. And, as I always like to think of that, I think that the middle way between extremes is a great epithet for Buddhism, really, because this way of seeing things, and indeed, as we all know, was the way that he ended up understanding and achieving, probably the wrong word to use too, of letting go into enlightenment would probably be a better way to say it. The way that he kind of did that was on the middle path, the path of the middle way between extremes. So maybe in there's some kind of clue for us to see just the way that we maybe should look towards making meaning in our life. So not being too ascetic, not trying to deny ourselves too much, but also, on the other hand, not trying to be too hedonistic or opulent, but just looking for a more balanced way of seeing things. And I think he ended up, certainly later in his life, after he'd after he lived a good few years as an enlightened person, he sort of set up the process of Buddhism with the four pillars of Buddhism: the pillar of ordained monks, the pillar of ordained nuns, the pillar of good laymen, and the pillar of good lay women. And he kind of worked out a way, I think a middle pathway of letting all of these four pillars work together, so that the lay people could support the monks and the nuns would in turn come back and support the lay people. He kind of made it so that the monastics couldn't get too far away from the lay people. They weren't able to go and sort of grow their own food or have their own money or that sort of thing. They were forced to be not to have any money at all, and needed to be dependent on the lay people. And if the lay people wanted to get the teachings from the monastics, well, then they needed to make sure that the monastics were fed and looked after, clothed well, and kept in good health. And really, that's what we do. When I certainly look at the Buddhist Society here in WA, the BSWA, I think that we've got a really fantastic balance going on here between our lay community and our monastic community. The way that and it's probably just a good point just to say that this Friday night too, you'll be all pleased to know that Ajahn Brahm will be back from the Range Retreat to do to teach again up here in Dhammaloka, and the monks will be back from here on. So it is quite wonderful to see the way that this organisation works, in the way that we're able to sort of look after our monks. As when you think of all the monks and nuns that we've got, and all of the different monasteries, and the way that the lay people come forth and make sure that they're all fed every day at all of the monasteries, at all of the places where we need to, whether they're up here in Perth or whether they're down in their monasteries. There is people there to make sure that they're fed every day. So it is a wonderful, balanced thing that we've got going really here, and just in the way that these four pillars are working in here. But then if we take that a little further, and the way that I would kind of like to look at this way of making meaning in life, because that certainly I think is really quite a wonderful example that we've got in the way that we can work together to make meaning, and we're sort of heading towards where I'm hopefully going to in this talk. We're going towards a place where this whole thing really comes together a little bit more in the way that meditation works. As we practice our meditation and we start to understand a little bit more of what the mind is and how the mind works, we can then start to really start to see a little bit more about what this middle way means, what the middle way between extremes means. especially as we start to look between the past and the future. Because for most of us, where we get sort of caught up in our lives, I think, is really across that blur from the past into the future. I mean, certainly there is the present moment in there as well, but very often we don't really investigate the present moment very, to a great enough extent anyway. So we tend to sort of blur our lives, if you like, across from the past into the future, carrying the past into the future, or the other way around, looking into the future and trying to be hopeful or trying to anticipate what might happen in the future. And this is really where we get to with that kind of way of doing it. We get into a fairly muddled way of sort of understanding what this universe is and just what we're trying to do with it, what meaning we need to make in our lives when we're looking at these kinds of things. But when you've got the meditation going for yourself and you kind of know, you're starting to know a little bit more about the present moment, you eventually get to a point where you're starting to be living closer to the present moment rather than to the extremes into the past and the future. You're starting to bring your life in a little bit more. Whenever I sort of visualise this for myself, I see it as like a seesaw. If you're sitting right on the edge of the seesaw, you've got sort of vast extremes that sort of go up and down. And they usually, match each other too. If you're grabbing onto something up this end, the opposite of whatever you're grabbing onto in this extreme will be certainly down here, and it's always there. You're always sort of caught in that sort of balance between the extremes of conditions and the dualities that are there in our language and in our psychology, just in the universe itself, even the matter and the antimatter that happen in the universe. It's all there in the dualities, and this is really what makes up, this is what the Buddha was talking about with dukkha. The fact that when we are trying to live with these seesawing kind of conditions in our lives, it's just very difficult to try and to get some meaning out of all of that and to really understand what it's about, because we get lost. Some people like it up here, some people like it here, some people would probably prefer the opposite extremes. So you're always getting these differences going on in the world that cause all sorts of troubles, and heaven knows we've been trying to make the world a peaceful place now for many, many years, and it hasn't really been that successful. So you can really see what the Buddha meant when he brought that first noble truth forward to point the idea of this dukkha to us, because it gets very, very hard to work when you're working with these kind of seesawing kind of problems. But then as you bring your mind, if you're just sort of taking this seesaw as the past and the future, if you like, if we start to come in though, we're coming in closer to the present moment. And the differences in the way that in the amplitudes of that seesawing does start to get a little bit less. It's a little bit more subtle towards the fulcrum of the seesaw. But ultimately, you can look at this analogy this way and seeing that the meditation that we do is really uncovering the present moment. So we're trying to get as close into that fulcrum of the seesaw as we can, right into the heart of the present moment. And this is really where the Buddha was looking to notice and see just what the reality that we're dealing with in these extremes, what the reality is right there when everything balances, where everything balances right out, right in the heart of the present moment. So he made the present moment a fairly important place, actually, just by virtue of the fact that the meditation really gravitates towards that. When we start to let go, we're starting just to make our mind, the consciousness of our mind becomes more still. So there we have this word stillness, still or stillness. So then we can start to sort of see this in terms of being conscious of the stillness. So once you start to see that, you're starting to see that consciousness of stillness is really quite an important thing to know. But most people in the world wouldn't really consider that to be too much of a good thing to know, or maybe they might think it's a good thing to know, but they're just never able to either put enough time into practice towards it, or to have enough insight to see that it is an important thing to know about. But as you practice meditation more and more and more, you start to see that this is really a very important part of the practice, to be able to understand and start to know beyond any doubts at all that just exactly what this consciousness of stillness really is, and what it feels like too. Just the way that it feels inside your body. Just remembering that the very first factor of enlightenment is mindfulness. But then you get mindfulness of body, and then mindfulness of the feelings inside the body. So consciousness is a condition. Even still consciousness is a condition. We can see it, we can feel it. You can objectify it. It's something that you can make an object of in your life. And if you can make an object of something, you know that that object is not really you. If you can separate the objectify and separate the object that you're looking at in your mind, you know that it's not you. So consciousness is not really you. And this is an important realisation to see too, because as you're kind of looking in deeper and deeper at this still consciousness, the stillness is a wonderful thing to have, because of course you can make this consciousness of stillness, turn it into a datum point for yourself, to be able to, because if you can place yourself inside the stillness and keep that stillness present while you're living your life, you can still sort of live your life. Ajahn Brahm's teacher, used to give this advice to his monks when they went on retreat. He would say that whatever you do, don't worry about what the senior teachers are doing, or don't be looking around to do. He said all you need to do in the retreat is just to sit down. He said, and to know what is apparent, so to know the world that's outside. But then he said also to know the transcendent, which is, he was pointing there to the stillness that's in your mind, which he which he was describing as the transcendent point, the point of transcendence. So coming to understand that stillness of mind as a point of transcendence, because once you start to sort of narrow that right down, you're right into the heart of the fulcrum of this seesaw, if you like. You're starting to balance past and future in a very profound way, in a way. So you're starting to get to the point where space and time are not even coming into existence, really. So you can. You're getting to a point here where you're really starting to, and you're doing this, but you're still living your life normally, but you've got this datum point of the stillness there that gives you the clue that this is really a very important place to understand where reality is, to understand what the reality of this life is, to look more deeply and more closely into this point of stillness that's right there in the heart of the present moment. And what the Buddha talked about when he did see that, what he said he saw, and what he was encouraging us to look at and see too, but he said he saw these three things, these three characteristics of all things. He saw the dukkha that comes about from the clarity that comes from the meditation when you're at that point. And he said that he saw that everything is impermanent. It has this state of anicca. So everything is in flux, everything is moving. And then he said the last characteristic of all things is that everything is anatta, or no self. So he saw that in the dukkha, inside the dukkha there's just movement, and inside the movement, when he looked and examined deeply inside the movement itself, there was nothing there. So it's the movement itself that's really giving us the idea that this apparent world is what it is. And I think the reason why the Buddha kind of emphasised these three characteristics of all things, because they are a very important trio of things for us to think about in Buddhism. And I think the reason why he thought that they were so important for us to think about is because they do start to give us the clue as to where we should be looking to make meaning in our life. Should we be looking externally at this external world? Or, as the meditation is taking us deep inside ourselves, he's starting to see this still consciousness as something that is deep inside. And he always said that everything that I've seen inside this fathom-long length of body. He didn't say that he'd seen or found any of these truths in the external world. It was all found inside his own fathom-length body. So what he actually saw, or what did he see when he was sort of looking in there, this is really just the fact that this still consciousness arises from inside, but it sort of expands out to really define the whole universe, this stillness. And that's certainly very consistent with the way physicists see the world, the way that if you want to sort of add it all up mathematically and sort of look at it all kind of balances out like that. But what the important thing that he saw, though, is that all of this is coming from his own mind. The world itself was being created in his own mind. So that sort of makes the stillness very, very a very important sort of thing, because it shows that this consciousness of stillness has the ability to create. It creates this universe. All the conditioning over the countless lifetimes that we've all had, and the way that we're kind of conditioning each other, looking after each other, we've got this world out there. But the Buddha's looked at it and he's seen the three characteristics of all things in this world, and sort of saw that and seen that it's coming from inside. He's not suggesting that this thing is an external world. In fact, he's really asking us to... In fact, he has that very catchy kind of Pali word that he uses, "Ahipasiko, ahipasiko, come and see." It means come and see for yourself. Ahipasiko, come and see. Come and see inside your own body, your own mind. That's what he was sort of telling us to do. Come and see where this world is, what this world is. Have a look and see, are the three characteristics real? Are they true? Whereabouts is the mind? So I think when we start to get to this kind of level of practice and seeing things, you really are starting to make a really wonderful meaning of your life, meaning for your life, because you're taking your life towards the enlightenment that he saw. You're moving towards that what he was pointing to right in the heart of the present moment, pointing to the enlightenment that we can all experience. But again, this is a very important thing, because every person really has their own view of this world. In fact, it's in quantum mechanical terms, it's not only just every person, it's every every little particle that makes up your particular body, and the way that you see things has its own view of this world. That's what quantum mechanics says, and this is really why everything can exist in the present moment, why all of Einstein's theories and why all that works in the present moment. Because we do all have our own particular view of the world. So it comes down to each one of us to look into our minds and just see the way our minds create. Because we can create anything in our minds. You know, if we want to go to Mars, we'll go to Mars. I don't understand why we want to do that, but especially when there's so much stuff that we probably need to be doing here or should be doing here on the earth, and especially even in terms of maybe looking after each other or looking after the animals, looking after the biodiversity of this world. There's all sorts of things like that, but if we want to go to Mars, we can. It's the possibility to create is just there. The still consciousness gives us that ability. But what the Buddha did show us too was that it also gave us the ability to have this still consciousness penetrate into these conditions. And if you allow them to penetrate into these conditions, they will relax and break up. And that's what we'll start to look at a bit in the meditation that we do tonight, just the way that this relaxation does bring about the ability to for that still consciousness to start to really get right inside, for your awareness, your knowledge of this pure consciousness, to see what it does and what it can do in the way that it penetrates, in the way that it kind of relaxes and smooths everything out to balance, the way that it balances the past with the future, right in the heart of the present moment. And just the beauty and the joy and the subtlety that is there with that. And, you know, you might notice that Ajahn Brahm's always talking about this, and it's so true. The joy of the subtlety that comes about in your mind when you've got that ability to just to be still in the moment. It's just truly rapturous. You're sort of it's so compelling you can't kind of stop from wanting to be with it, because the contentment and the joy and the happiness but it's subtle. It's not like you know it's not like when you're right out on the extremes of things. You know, maybe driving a racing car or climbing up Mount Everest or something like that. It's not a kind of a thrill kind of a thing like that. This is subtle. It's right here in the heart of that seesawing fulcrum, right in the and to sort of see that happiness and joy, you've got to have quite a subtle mind. You've practiced to make your mind quite subtle. But as you do that, this beautiful, beautiful joy and happiness just arises spontaneously. It's just there, and it rises. It's the fourth factor of enlightenment, in fact, that joy, that piety that comes. And it kind of allows you to sort of go deeper and deeper then into, it allows that the next thing after the fourth factor of enlightenment, the next thing after that happens is the tranquility that just comes, the way that everything just there's this calming, tranquil place that kind of opens up for you. And then the sixth factor of enlightenment is just the concentration that can then come, because once that tranquility and then the concentration can just go so deep, and the stillness just opens up. The clarity and the beauty of what you're kind of looking at is just starting to open up for you, to allow you to work with the seventh factor of enlightenment, which is equanimity. So I hope that sort of gives you some idea of just, I think, where the Buddhist point of view of the way we should make meaning from our lives is, really, because We can do anything we want with this world. We can create anything that we want. And certainly we do some wonderful things too in the world. I certainly don't want to use this talk in a way that I'm trying to sort of look down upon all of the noble things that we do in this world, because we do some wonderful things. We do some horrendous things too, but the wonderful things that we do, the way that people help, the loving kindness that's given out, and just the kindness in general around the world. Most people are quite kind. We've all got compassion inside ourselves. We have access to these form Brahma Viharas all of the time if we want to take that up. The compassion, the metta, and the mudita, the sympathetic joy, and then sort of taking you again onto the equanimity. So all these things are there for us, and they're there in the world. But when we're really looking to make meaning in our lives, is it good at the end of our life to just look back and say, well, what was that all about? What happened there? What happened in that life? And I kind of just as a hypnotherapist, it's really interesting to see that too, because, you know, time after time when I've got clients here with me that are kind of talking and explaining about their past lives and sort of and recounting their past lives in the therapy that we do, it's just astonishing just where you can go to and just how how we do appear to be so much just on this treadmill of the earth, without really the treadmill of life, really, without really fully appreciating just the wonders that we can actually have, or the wonder we can have for ourselves if we make good meaning in our life, reflect and make good meaning, so that we can take ourselves closer into the truth. So, with those few words, we'll move on and do some meditation. So I invite everybody to sit comfortably. If you're in the chair, that's fine too. Sitting on the floor. But just make your back nice and straight. Right hand on the left's always good, always, and just your thumbs touching. And then just closing your eyes, closing your mouth, breathing through your nose, and just letting your tongue rest against your palate. And just bringing your attention inside your body. And we are going to just make a resolution to keep our minds inside our body so that we're not going to be distracted to anything that's external. Just keeping the attention inside the body. And then just in keeping with the first factor of enlightenment, the mindfulness, we'll just do some mindfulness of the body. So just bringing your attention to your feet, your toes, moving your attention over the arch of your foot into your heels and then into the ankles. Moving up through the lower part of your leg, the shins, the calves, and then through the knees, into the thighs. And just feeling as best you can into all of those parts of your body, sensing the strength in your thighs. Then moving through your bottom into your lower back and tummy, and just noticing the pressure on the seat of your bottom, the way that gravity is pulling you down. Just allowing you to gently rest in your seat. Then moving up through the tummy, up into the chest and the upper back, around the shoulder blades. And then just noticing your arms hanging by your sides, bent at the elbows, into the forearms and the hands and the fingers. And again, as I usually want to do, is just to linger around my fingers. And just if you're just holding your hands fairly loosely, you'll start to feel just that tingling that's there in your fingers, where all the nerve endings are working. But you can feel, it's almost like that effervescent feeling. And I very much like to, in my mind, just take a snapshot of that and then maybe just look to transfer it somewhere else on your body, maybe on your thigh or on your back. Wherever you focus your attention on, just notice that that tingling is there too. That tingling is really everywhere on your body, especially noticeable at your fingers. This is really a sure sign of just that second characteristic of all things. You're kind of noticing the anicca of your body, the way that the whole thing is in flux, moving. But in this case, quite beautifully and in a way relaxing. Because you can be sure that when that tingling is present, your body is relaxing. You're removing all the tension that's there from it. And your body's just sitting not under any tension at all, just relaxed. And you can feel that effervescent feeling, that fizz. So then just coming up to your neck and into your head and round behind your eyes, your mouth, tongue, up to the top of your head. And then you can just start to bring your attention to your breath. The wonderful Anapanasati Meditation. And just concentrating in the first instant on the samatha side, just allowing your mind to become, as much as it can, one-pointed on your breath, just to watch the breath as it flows in and flows out. To be satisfied with just that much. Grateful that the breath is bringing you this life-giving oxygen and all of the chemicals to keep you alive. Just the way that it is conditioned, as it conditioned to breathe in, conditioned to stop and then to flow out, to finish. So right here we're watching the second and the third noble truth. The beginning of a condition, Breathing in. And the ending of a condition as we breathe out, the third noble truth. And you can notice how in the samatha side of this Anapanasati meditation, the way that the body is starting to feel quite calm and peaceful, tranquil. The mind is easily relaxing into the relaxation of the body. And we're using the Vipassana side of the Anapanasati, the other side of the coin. So we've got Samatha on the one side and then Vipassana on the other. And they work equally as a pair. And as we're calming down, we're developing insight. We can start to notice how we are feeling much more relaxed. We can start to notice that the mind is feeling quite content. We can notice that we're not racing out to try and grasp onto desires. And equally we can notice that we're not racing to grasp or push away any aversions that we might have. Even little niggles and pains, we can just allow them to be. And we can start to really rejoice and feel really good about just this much contentment in the mind. And the Vipassana is also bringing us knowledge that our restlessness is not with us, that we are quite still, peaceful. And it can also show us that we're not trying to fall asleep. We are awake and we're aware. And you might even notice that beautiful balance of our energy is starting to even allow just our back to kind of rise up so that the backbone and all the vertebrae are kind of quite nicely spaced. They're not slumping or crunching down on each other. The energy is becoming balanced in our body. And the contentment is showing us that the desires and the aversions are abating and are not relevant right now. So this insight, this Vipassana, is showing us that the 5 hindrances are under control. Even the 5th hindrance of doubt is now not so relevant for us because we're feeling good. we're feeling content, and we're feeling balanced. And we're working to make our mind even more relaxed. Maybe even to the point where the breath starts to fade away, or to be so subtle. That when the mind finds it again, the mind itself has to be very subtle. And the breath, even though it's there, can start to be seen against this new experience of still consciousness, stillness. Again, the stillness can be seen in a few ways. It can be seen as emptiness, the way that the Mahayanan community might prefer to see, or it can be seen as spaciousness, the space in our minds, or just stillness. But whichever way this is manifesting for you, it is consciousness. And you can start to see your breath beginning in the still consciousness and then finishing, ending in the still consciousness. And of course, when you're listening to the words that I'm saying, you don't need to take any notice of them. You don't need to make a commentary on them or try and work them out. Because these words too are just coming and going in the stillness. It is hearing consciousness that is going out to hold on to the words, and you don't have to do that. You can just let these words brush over the top. Without you needing to make any commentary on them at all. But once again, insight gives you the idea and shows you how these five senses, the five bodily senses, operate inside the still consciousness. shows us how this consciousness is fungible, how we use it in the way that we condition it. And we can go deeper and deeper with the stillness. In a moment I'm going to ring the bell, and once again I'll do that 3 times and just allow the resonance to continue. And while that resonance is there, I would just invite you to keep your eyes closed and just make an assessment of what's happened for you. What the mind feels like now compared to when it began. And essentially too, just to take a check just on what it feels like to be still. And see if you can take a snapshot of that feeling so that it can be amplified and cultivated. So that essentially you'll be able to use it as a datum point, a point of reference as you're living your life. And as Ajahn Chah says, you will then always have a point of transcendence to know. Because this still consciousness is, in fact, a condition. It does, in fact, finish. Mindfulness needs to be there, to know when and if this happens. So it is important to cultivate stillness, to know it, and to know it beyond any doubt. So once again, I trust that that was beneficial for you to see how the Buddha made meaning in his life and how we can follow in his footsteps to make meaning in our lives, meaning that's truthful, meaning that's important, and meaning that's beneficial for the whole world. So, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions. So you're very welcome to join us over in the kitchen again now. I'd very much like to, we're sort of trying to encourage this fellowship after a meditation session like this and a talk. Happy to encourage you to come over and sort of join in with us in the kitchen. I'm sure there'll be a few little snacks over there. So if there isn't any questions, we'll perhaps pay respects to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. And we'll look forward to meeting you all in the kitchen.